My sincere apologies to both you, Lee, and the audience. We were just experiencing a very vexing refusal to work on the part of some computers. How are you tonight, Lee?
Good, Jason. I've never experienced technical problems before in my 40 years of doing video, so I'm very confused by this.
It happens, of course. Tonight, Lee, you and I are going to ask the pressing question that's been on so many viewers' minds. It's been on my mind, I know, and it's basically, I want to know why the United States corporate-controlled media has gone just gaga over Russia for the past, I don't know, 4 years, something like this. I think you know the answer.
Yeah, so the thing I've been thinking about lately, because we've talked about this on the show before. The truth about a lot of things isn't actually difficult to figure out, and I'll say that again because it's a point of confusion for some people. The truth about a lot of things isn't actually difficult to figure out, and I'll just use a simple example that doesn't relate to Russia. I could use the Bill Browder example, but I've used this example before, and it's not hard to figure out. It's not hard to figure out that Mike Cernovich did not sue Jeffrey Epstein. And we've talked about Mike before and that group of people he's connected to. It is not hard to figure it out. You can read the filing. You can read Virginia Giuffre's case against Mike, which already tells you that he was not suing Epstein. He was suing to intervene on behalf of Dershowitz and effectively the Epstein network.
The family. Okay? Yeah.
Yes. Now, everybody on the right believes this, that Mike Cernovich sued Jeffrey Epstein. He said it enough. He said it a number of times, very directly, too. He said
maybe not everybody. He's working on convincing everybody, but I think he's influencing people.
Name, I'll just ask you, name the number of media outlets that have reported that he did not sue Jeffrey Epstein.
Crowdsource the truth.
Yeah. Then me when I went on Alex Jones and said it.
Right.
and the number of media outlets that have said the opposite is everybody, including Breitbart News. When Epstein was arrested and Mike took credit for that, they said he's in the spirit of Andrew Breitbart. And I wanted to punch him in the face.
Whoa, they said Cernovich is in the spirit of Andrew Breitbart?
Yes.
Wow.
Dude who never met Andrew. Andrew would have wanted to punch him in the face. So now some people, if they don't know the story and they just know the spin on it, they would go, no, Mike sued Jeffrey Epstein. And I could show them, right? You've looked it up. I've looked it up. It's not hard to look up. There are legal papers. Virginia Giuffre knew that he was suing on behalf of Dershowitz. That's what she thought, and she's a victim. Yet he said it over and over and over again and raised money on it, by the way, saying that he was suing Epstein. No, he wasn't. Now, it's actually not hard. You just look at the paperwork, right? So why is it, and you know what I'm saying? Oh, by the way, if you ask him about it, he will block you. So he doesn't really have a good argument, a counter argument. He does not say, no. I mean, he's sort of tried it a little bit, but he doesn't get very far because it's obvious he sued the victim. And he makes noises. Now, okay, so I raised this, and there's a dozen other issues. And we'll raise some of them tonight. Issues of international importance. The Syrian conflict, for instance. I could go on and on, but everything everyone thinks about Russia, I will, and this is where I'm headed. One of the little litmus tests I realize that I use is almost everything everyone thinks about Russia in the form of Vladimir Putin is wrong, period. Now, again, I was in that camp too, where I'd had experience what I knew was I went to Beirut in 2013. And I went to Beirut because I saw the Syrian conflict was starting up. And I was seeing conflicting reports from Assad's government and from the U.S. government. And I didn't trust either one of them, so I wanted to go and see for myself. It was very obvious to me. And again, it's not tricky to figure out where the BS comes from on that. But okay. But I went over and I saw that the U.S. was on the wrong side. In fact, the United States, and they continued this through Trump's reign, supported Al-Qaeda. We supported the jihadist Salafi terrorist in Syria. That started under Obama and it continued under Trump. And it's going to continue under Biden. It's already continuing.
Yeah.
So
ramping up even under Biden.
Ramping up. Here's what I found. So when Russia got involved on the side of Syria, I was like, well, yeah, they're the good guys, so they should be. Now, good guys is a relatively tricky term because no, it's relatively tricky, but
well, it's subjective, not, isn't it?
No. Okay, here's the thing: Assad's regime has done stuff that I don't agree with, but it's generally not the stuff they're accused of. My friend George Galloway, the British politician, told me a story that he had worked to get the Assad government to release a constituent of his when he was a member of parliament. And he'd arranged it so the Assad government would release this guy who's a British citizen, but, you know, of Syrian, I think, descent. And he'd gone over there. And he'd arranged for it. And the night before Galloway went over, the guy committed suicide in his cell.
Ooh, maybe he knows Jeffrey Epstein.
No, well, no. This is the night before Galloway was going to take him and bring him back to the UK.
But that's what I mean. The suicide seems suspicious.
Well, yeah. And so Galloway said to the Syrians he was dealing with, he said, here's the problem you got. And he said in his brilliant accent, all right, here's the problem you got. I just can't do it, but he's brilliant. So he said, here's the problem you got. The problem you've got isn't that nobody will believe you. The problem you've got right now is that I don't believe you. He said, I don't believe you for a second that this guy committed suicide. And for a second, right? Because he's not stupid. And he'd arranged for everything to happen. He's like, you're telling me. And he said, I don't believe you. Now, that's why I admire George Galloway. He didn't let these guys BS him. And he told me, he said, I don't think Assad ordered that. He said, I think Assad, and people who follow the presidency here, if I said Donald Trump wasn't really in charge of his presidency at a number of points, everyone would go, well, yeah, duh. And maybe Obama wasn't either, and all presidents. Well, Assad's got the same problem. So I'm not wholesale saying everything the Assad regime does is great. And there were people who opposed Assad before the U.S. started intervening, who then got on Assad's side and said, you know what?
Way less bad.
He's better. Yeah. He's better than these people.
Right.
And so, no, that's literally, I mean,
we should clarify, Lee. I mean, opposing somebody is the type of thing you can do on the floor of Congress. Going and bombing and killing them is kind of a step beyond just opposing their politics or policies.
Yeah, and that's why when we get into Russia, certainly the Soviet Union, I was not a fan of the Soviet Union. We had Scott Ritter on my show today, and Scott made the point that people act now like Soviet Union ends and Vladimir Putin pops up, and they forget the whole 10-year period of the 90s in Russia. So this is not to wholesale whatever, say anything, but I will tell you this. Every story that I know about Vladimir Putin, and we'll go over a bunch of them, is fake. It's fake propaganda for a reason. And that's why, in the same way like that Cernovich story I brought up, just as a simple example of something that I hear everybody say, that unlike, let's say, the Benghazi story, where people will say to me, well, the video had nothing to do with it. You think people would kill? They're wrong. The video absolutely was a factor in the Benghazi attack. That takes me longer to explain. Does that make sense? I can explain it. I can factually go through it, but it's about 5 or 6 points. You got to show that the video was known to people. Then you got to show the video from Al Naz TV. Then you've got to show how it came up, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's an example that I can't do in like one. If we're playing the Kevin Bacon 1 degree of separation thing, the Cernovich thing, I just go, look, here's what Virginia Giuffre said.
Yeah.
Right. It's just boom. There you go. So you're either looking at that and then you go, okay, so that's step 1. Now step 2, ask Mike. And then when he blocks you, go, well, okay, checkmate. We got to it in 2 moves. Some stories, and the Russia story is one of them, because it involves so many things. So if I say that every story I see the Western media, U.S., British media put out about Putin is fake and all ties to a very small group of people, that's the other thing that's interesting about it. Browder, Christopher Steele, as you'll see, Christopher Steele doesn't just come up in Russiagate. This has been going on since Vladimir Putin took office and wasn't playing the oligarchs' game anymore. They realized they had a problem. They were completely open to Putin when they thought he was going to be another puppet of the oligarchs. And we'll talk about that and explain who the oligarchs are, how you can find this out, what people can look up to figure it out. It's not hard. It's not hard. But if people get the Russia thing wrong, there's so much they're never going to get. They're never going to, if they get, I'll put it like this. It would be like talking to somebody who's like, well, the CIA is they're just a patriotic American organization. Why are you questioning the CIA, Tommy? Right? You don't know where to start with a person like that. And where I'm at now, and I understand that I'm in the vast, vast, vast minority on this, because I've done the research. You realize how much propaganda has been put out to simply demonize Russia and Putin for financial reasons. That's why they do it. That's why they demonize it. As Scott Ritter said on my show today, but based on the question I asked, it's not about human rights, and it's certainly not about communism, because Putin's not a communist, and there are communists in Russia, and they don't like Putin. The Communist Party, who's Putin's opposition, is the biggest opposition party. It's not this guy Navalny. It's the
I'm glad you mentioned Navalny, because I've been asking you about Navalny for a while, and I get it that it's not necessarily something that you've studied quite a lot. But the reason this guy became interesting to me is because I've told Charles about this quite a lot. You're a little older than I am, Lee. When I was about 10 or 12, just sort of like becoming a teenager, they started advertising the purple dinosaur Barney, which was clearly meant for younger kids than me, but I was in this age where I was looking at the commercial, and the commercial says, "Hey kids, it's your old friend Barney." And I said to myself, old friend, who the hell is this guy? I've never seen him before. And that's how I feel about this guy, Navalny. He's come out of nowhere, and they're like, oh, the Kremlin's biggest opposition. And I'm thinking, who the hell is this guy? I've never heard of him before. And suddenly, Ben Whitties is tweeting about him. Adam Schiff is defending him. So this story has got stink all over it, right?
There's no, literally, and again, but to understand Navalny, it helps to understand it in the context that every single thing, not you, but you and everybody and me, everybody in our general age group, 50, I'm 55, so certainly 55 and under, because I know it's my whole life. You've been propagandized
to hate Russia,
and the propaganda has been so. People talk about the Uniparty, And it's this thing you and I have talked about before. It's this concept of people haven't been red-pilled enough. A lot of people think they're red-pilled. They're not at all. I'll put it this way. If you don't understand the truth about the propaganda about Russia and Putin, you are not red-pilled. I'm just going to say that flat out. If you think that Putin is a bad guy because and as a human rights and all this other stuff, you're not red-pilled. I'll just say it. You're not red-pilled. You have been fed a limited hangout. And until you understand the real propaganda, the stuff that Trump fell for, because Trump was much tougher on Russia, much tougher. He was gaslit into it, despite being the president and everything else, despite I've never talked to Putin. He's talked to Putin. And the forces that have red-pilled him start with Jared Kushner, Rupert Murdoch, Fox News, everything else. But I'll just say it as bluntly as I can. If you buy the standard American line on Putin and Russia, you are not actually red-pilled. You're fake red-pilled. You think that whatever. Well, I understand the media doesn't like Trump. That is so elementary, and primary that I know it's a big revel. I know for a lot of people, it may have just happened in 2016 where they went, "Hey, the media is kind of biased, right?" Like,
Lee, Mark is with us in the comments on YouTube, says that Putin is anti-globalism, and that's good enough for me. It's an interesting point of view. I mean, when you listen to some of these interviews or presentations that he's giving at the UN and various kind of, leader meetings around the world, consistently he's saying the most sensible things. I mean, you compare him to Adam Schiff, you compare him to Joe Biden, even Donald Trump. He seems sensible in what he's saying.
So here's what it is. He's anti-globalist, kind of. I know what you mean, Mark. I know exactly what you mean. But from talking to a number of people who are in Russia, some of whom are Americans, the people I talk to, Peter Lavelle from Crosstalk on RT, Mark Sloboda, who's a guest on my show frequently, other friends I have who are from Russia. Here's the thing. People hear me be critical of Israel or Saudi Arabia or something like that. Putin's not. So what's up with that? Putin and Russia simply want to deal with people. If somebody comes to them and says, "We want to trade with you," they're kind of like, "Okay, let's talk about it." And so in a sense, but they're not going to give up sovereignty, their own sovereignty. Does that make sense? They don't want to go that far. Yeah. But their attitude, for instance, about Israel is Israel exists. I'll deal with Netanyahu. And it's the same thing. He high-fived MBS. Remember that when Putin high-fived MBS? And by the way, I was critical on my Sputnik radio show of that because I'm like, I think the guy's a killer. I wouldn't have done that. And I didn't get fired or anything. And so if the U.S. was like, we'd like to deal with Russia as a trading partner more, they'd be like, okay. They really would be. And what Peter Lavelle told me, this is a private, off the air conversation. He and I I was just asking him stuff. And I said, my understanding from talking to the people I work with, my boss is Georgian, for instance. And he's a great boss, and he's always been straight with me. And so, like, for instance, what do you think the answer is? Like, do you know why everyone tells me Russia doesn't interfere in our elections? You know why?
I don't. But I want to know, however, Lee, we're just seconds away from the transition to our sponsor exclusive segment on patreon.com/Stranahan, patreon.com.
Let me not tease people that much. I'll give them the short answer.
And subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth. But give us the answer, and then we'll make the switch.
The short answer is they realize that Democrat or Republican, all the political parties are against them. So what does it matter to Russia? They're both against Russia. We'll talk. There you go. There's a short answer.
And we'll get in depth on that. And we're going to hear some more about Navalny and some of these corporate-driven propaganda schemes. The least spoken about, but most important guy, Bill Browder, will be back in just a few minutes. Also want to remind everybody that the Jason Goodman channel is back in action as of today. So if you're watching us today, January 26th, the show went out live, been under strike on YouTube for 2 weeks. So join us on Patreon and Subscribestar so you never miss a live stream. We'll be back in